It's been the worst time of my life, Joe. For somebody to accuse me of raping them or hurting them, I have a 22-year-old daughter. I would never hurt anyone.
There's a face that has appeared in more than 100 films and television shows. A face that fans recognize instantly even when they cannot immediately place the name. That face belongs to Clifton Powell, an actor who has spent more than 4 decades working steadily in an industry that rarely rewards steadiness. He has played villains who spoke in cold, quiet whispers. He has played comic sidekicks whose timing made entire theaters erupt. He has played fathers, hustlers, preachers, and everyday men caught in extraordinary circumstances. And yet, despite a career built on undeniable talent, Powell has also lived through a legal battle that nearly ended everything, and through a pattern of discrimination that he has only recently begun to speak about in detail. This is the real story, built from court records, contemporaneous news reporting, and Powell's own words in interviews he has given over the years. Clifton Powell was born on March 16, 1956, in Washington, D.C. He grew up in the Mayfair Mansions neighborhood in the northeastern part of the city, a working-class community that shaped much of his early outlook on life. According to accounts of his upbringing, Powell was an energetic child who did not always take easily to the rules of formal schooling. He moved between a couple of schools during his teenage years, eventually landing at an arts-focused high school, where his early interest in performance began to take shape. Before he ever considered acting seriously, Powell has said he dreamed of playing football, a common ambition for boys in his neighborhood at the time. It was a chance experience with a stage musical, by his own account of viewing of a production of My Fair Lady, that first pulled him toward the idea of performing for a living. Powell went on to study at Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts, an institution known for its programs in communication and the performing arts. It was there that he began to build the technical foundation that would eventually support a career spanning stage, film, television, and voice work. Before Hollywood ever knew his name, Powell was already testing himself in front of live audiences, and it was on stage where he first started collecting recognition for his craft. He won an NAACP Theater Award for Best Actor for his work in a stage production called The Talented Tenth, and he later toured nationally with the Negro Ensemble Company in a production of A Soldier's Play, one of the most respected touring shows for black theater performers of that era. He also appeared in stage productions alongside recording artists, such as Shantae Moore and Johnny Gill, further building his reputation as a serious and versatile performer long before cameras ever found him. That stage foundation matters more than it might first appear. Long before casting directors in Los Angeles knew his face, Powell was already learning the discipline of live performance, the kind of work where there is no second take and no editing room to fix a missed beat. Theater actors of that era, especially those touring with companies built around black storytelling, often developed a resilience and versatility that later served them well once film and television opportunities opened up. For Powell, those years on stage were not a stepping stone he later dismissed as a lesser chapter of his career. He has continued to speak about that period with real pride, crediting it with teaching him the fundamentals that carried him through decades of screen work that followed. Powell's first credited screen work came in 1981 in a television movie called Ephraim McDowell's Kentucky Ride. It was a modest beginning, the kind of small role that rarely leads anywhere on its own. He picked up additional small parts through the 1980s, including an appearance in the 1984 film Alphabet City and a role in the television series Tour of Duty. These early years were not glamorous. They were the unglamorous groundwork that most working actors have to lay before a single breakout role changes their trajectory. For Powell, that breakout came in 1993. Menace to Society, directed by the Hughes brothers, was a gritty, unflinching look at life in South Central Los Angeles, and it became one of the defining films of the early 1990s urban drama wave. Powell played Chauncey, a supporting character whose presence added weight and authenticity to the film's bleak portrait of cyclical violence. The role did not make him a household name overnight, but it did something arguably more valuable for a character actor. It put him on the radar of directors and casting agents who needed performers who could bring real weight to difficult material. 2 years later, he appeared in Dead Presidents, another critically respected crime drama from the Hughes brothers, further cementing his reputation as an actor who could hold his own in dark, layered material. Both films were part of a broader wave of early 1990s cinema that took seriously the lives of young black men navigating poverty, violence, and limited opportunity. And Powell's contributions to that wave placed him among a group of performers who helped define an entire era of American film. Working with the Hughes brothers twice in close succession also gave Powell a level of credibility with directors who valued actors capable of bringing lived-in realism to difficult material, a reputation that would follow him for the rest of his career. Powell's range, though, was never limited to crime dramas. As the 1990s gave way to the 2000s, he became known just as much for his comedic work as for his dramatic roles. He appeared in the 1998 buddy cop blockbuster Rush Hour, playing Luke, a role that put him in front of one of the biggest box office audiences of his career up to that point. Then, in 2000, he took on the role that many fans still associate with him most closely, Pinky in Next Friday. The character, a fast-talking, larger-than-life figure in the Friday franchise, allowed Powell to showcase a comedic timing that surprised audiences who mostly knew him from tougher, more dramatic roles. He reprised the role in the 2002 sequel Friday After Next, and the character became one of the most quoted and beloved supporting figures in the entire Friday series. By 2004, Powell had built a reputation as one of the most reliable character actors working in Hollywood, but that year brought him his most significant recognition yet. He was cast as Jeff Brown, the loyal road manager to Ray Charles, in the biographical film Ray, starring Jamie Foxx in an Oscar-winning performance as the legendary musician. Powell's portrayal of Brown, a steady and grounded presence amid the chaos of Charles's rise to fame and his struggles with addiction, earned him widespread critical praise. The performance was strong enough to secure Powell a nomination for the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Motion Picture, one of the most significant recognitions of his career. Ray went on to win 2 Academy Awards and became one of the most celebrated music biopics of its era, and Powell's presence in the film placed him, at least for a moment, in the same conversation as some of the biggest names in the industry. That same era brought Powell into a very different kind of pop culture relevance. In 2004, he provided the voice for Big Smoke, one of the central characters in the video game Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas. The game became a cultural phenomenon and one of the best-selling titles of its generation. And Big Smoke, memorable both for his physical presence in the game and for several lines of dialogue that would later become internet memes, introduced Powell's voice to an entirely new generation of fans who may never have seen him on a movie screen at all. It is a strange and telling detail of Powell's career that some of his most recognizable work, in terms of sheer number of people exposed to it, came not from film or television, but from a video game character whose voice he provided nearly 2 decades ago. Not every story from Powell's career is one of steady advancement. In the mid-1990s, he was cast in a supporting role in Vampire in Brooklyn, the horror comedy led by Eddie Murphy. According to accounts of the production, Powell left the film after an incident involving a member of the crew, whom he found to be behaving in a racially hostile manner toward him. The production's leadership was informed of the incident, and according to Powell's account, no meaningful action was taken. Powell chose to walk away from the project rather than continue working under those conditions, a decision that cost him a role in a major studio release, but one that he has framed, in later interviews, as a matter of basic self-respect. That incident did not end his relationship with Murphy, however. A decade later, in 2007, Murphy cast Powell in a supporting role in Norbit, a box office hit that reintroduced Powell to mainstream audiences. The gap between those 2 projects says something about how Powell chose to handle conflict throughout his career. He was willing to walk away when he felt disrespected, but he did not let that walking away define or end his professional relationships. It is a pattern that shows up again and again when Powell talks about his decades in the industry. A willingness to hold a line, paired with a refusal to let any single conflict close doors permanently. It is worth pausing on what that choice actually cost him at the time. Walking off a major studio production, even for a legitimate reason, is not a decision most working actors can afford to make lightly. Roles are hard to come by, and a reputation for being difficult, fair or not, can follow a performer for years. Powell has never suggested that the decision was easy, only that it was necessary. He has framed it, in later interviews, Less as an act of defiance and more as a basic boundary, he was unwilling to cross regardless of what it might cost him professionally. That the two projects with Murphy bookend more than a decade of his career, rather than ending it, speaks to how Powell managed to hold firm on personal principle without letting it permanently sever a valuable professional relationship. No accounting of Clifton Powell's career would be honest if it left out the legal battle that consumed a significant portion of his life, beginning in 2011. In August of that year, according to a federal civil lawsuit later filed in the Eastern District of Louisiana, a woman using the pseudonym Kiani Myers alleged that Powell sexually assaulted her in a hotel room in New Orleans. According to the complaint, Myers, who worked as a cocktail waitress at Harrah's Casino and who said she had known Powell for roughly 2 years, alleged that an evening that began consensually turned violent when Powell refused to stop despite her objections. The New Orleans Police Department investigated the allegation shortly after it was reported, but according to later court filings, the lead detective on the case found Myers' account to be unsupported, in part because Myers herself reportedly told the detective, when asked directly, that she had not been forced into the sexual activity. No criminal charges were ever filed against Powell. That should have been close to the end of the matter, but it was not. In 2012, Myers filed a civil lawsuit against Powell in federal court, seeking more than $75,000 in damages. The lawsuit, obtained and reported on by outlets including TMZ and Courthouse News Service, generated a wave of headlines that framed the allegations in stark terms, and for an actor whose public image had been built over 3 decades of steady, likable work, the sudden shift in coverage was jarring. Powell denied the allegations from the outset. In a statement issued through a representative at the time, he called the accusations false and said he intended to pursue every legal option available to him. In a radio interview shortly after the lawsuit became public, Powell suggested that the allegations were motivated by money, stating that he had never been arrested and had never hurt anyone, and expressing frustration that the story was being covered as though it were breaking news a full year after the alleged incident occurred. The civil case moved slowly, as civil litigation often does, and at one point took an unusual turn. In 2013, a default judgment was entered against Powell after his attorney at the time failed to appear in court, resulting in an award of roughly $130,000 to Myers on an emotional distress claim. Powell later moved to have that default judgment set aside, arguing that he had not been properly served with the relevant court papers and had believed, based on communication with his attorney, that the matter was being handled. The underlying case continued to work its way through the federal court system for several more years. In January 2018, a federal judge issued a ruling that dismissed Myers' remaining claims for lack of sufficient evidence, effectively closing the case. In the same ruling, the court also dismissed counterclaims that Powell himself had filed against Myers, which alleged defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Both sides, in other words, saw their claims against the other dismissed by the court. What the court records make clear is a matter often lost in the shorthand of tabloid headlines. Clifton Powell was never charged with a crime, was never arrested in connection with the allegation, and was never found liable in the civil proceedings that followed. The case that dragged through the legal system for roughly 7 years ended not with a conviction or a finding of liability, but with dismissal. Yet the years in between were not without real cost to Powell. He has spoken about how difficult that period was for him personally, describing it in interviews as one of the most painful stretches of his life, and noting the toll it took on his relationships with people who assumed the worst before any court had reached a conclusion. The gap between the legal outcome and the public perception that formed around the case is, in many ways, the most important thing to understand about this chapter of his life. A dismissal does not automatically restore a reputation, and Powell has acknowledged that some of the professional and personal damage from that period never fully healed. In recent years, and especially in a series of candid interviews given in 2025, Powell has become considerably more open about another challenge that shaped his career from the beginning: colorism within Hollywood casting. In a conversation with the YouTube channel The Art of Dialogue, Powell described losing a major television movie role after producers reportedly told the director that his skin tone was so dark that it would frighten audiences. He said he had never spoken publicly about the specifics of that incident before, indicating he planned to include a fuller account in a forthcoming book. In the same interview, he described being turned away from McDonald's commercial for similar reasons, with an advertising agency reportedly deciding he was too dark for the spot, despite the fact that a friend of his was producing the project. Powell did not limit his comments to his own experiences. He referenced a widely circulated story involving actor Wesley Snipes, in which an agent representing Snipes was reportedly told by casting representatives not to submit actors darker than Denzel Washington for certain roles. Powell used the anecdote to make a broader point about how deeply colorism runs through the entertainment industry, arguing that these preferences reflect patterns present throughout American society rather than something isolated to Hollywood alone. He also described uncomfortable experiences working alongside crew members on one television production whom he identified as having ties to the Ku Klux Klan, saying plainly that he has never tolerated disrespect on set, regardless of its source. Despite the bluntness of these accounts, Powell has been careful to frame his criticism as constructive rather than purely condemnatory. He has said he does not want to simply attack Hollywood, describing the industry instead as a reflection of broader societal patterns rather than something uniquely broken. He has also spoken about a separate incident involving his agent at the time, Jeff Witches, who Powell says questioned him for taking a role in the 2005 musical drama The Gospel, referring to it dismissively as another one of those little black movies. According to Powell, he responded that he had a family to support and hung up the phone, and shortly afterward the agency dropped him as a client. Powell has said that losing that representation did not deter him, and that advice he received early on from Jamie Foxx to always keep one foot planted with the audiences and communities that supported him from the start helped guide the choices he made afterward. One of the most striking facts about Clifton Powell's career is simply its length and volume. He has accumulated well over 100 film and television credits, and by some counts is approaching 300, a number that places him among the most prolific character actors of his generation. Following his period of higher-profile studio work in the 1990s and 2000s, Powell transitioned into a steady stream of smaller, independent, and direct-to-video productions, along with guest appearances and recurring roles on television. He has appeared in shows including Rock, South Central, and Army Wives, as well as guest spots on long-running series, such as In the Heat of the Night and Murder, She Wrote. In more recent years, he has continued working prolifically, appearing in the crime drama Black Mafia Family, the Peacock series Fight Night, The $1 Million Heist, and the sitcom The Last OG, among many other projects. Powell has been candid in interviews about the financial realities of that long career path. He has said publicly that he did not begin making substantial money as an actor until he was in his early 50s, a fact he shares with younger performers as encouragement rather than as a complaint. He has described being left behind by acquaintances during leaner years, only to see some of those same people return once his career picked up financially. And he has said the experience taught him not to let hardship stop him from continuing to work. Alongside his acting career, Powell has built other ventures, including restaurant businesses in Pasadena, California, which he has run together with his family, and he has periodically taught acting, including at institutions such as the SAE Institute in Atlanta, passing along lessons from his own long road in the industry to newer generations of performers. Powell has also spoken about the cost his career took on his personal life, particularly regarding his marriage. In recent interviews, he has described losing a substantial sum of money, reportedly in the range of $10 million, as part of a divorce, and has referred to marriage as one of the more difficult chapters of his personal life, cautioning other actors about the financial and emotional toll that a demanding career can place on a relationship. He has 2 children, Clifton Powell Jr. and Maya Powell, and has spoken with evident pride about collaborating creatively with his son, who has built his own career as a writer and director. What makes Clifton Powell's story compelling is not a single dramatic turn, but the accumulation of decades spent navigating an industry that offered him real opportunities alongside real barriers. He built a career on talent that was recognized by an NAACP Image Award nomination for one of the most celebrated music biopics of the 2000s. He voiced a character who became a fixture of gaming culture for an entire generation. He weathered a legal battle that dragged on for the better part of a decade before ending in dismissal, only to find that public perception does not always follow a court's final word, and in his own words, delivered directly and without much softening, he has described a pattern of colorism that shaped which roles were and were not available to him, even at the height of his abilities. Powell has chosen, particularly in recent years, to speak plainly about all of it. He has not framed himself as a victim of the industry so much as a survivor of its contradictions, a man who kept working through setbacks that might have ended other careers, who has continued booking roles into his late 60s, and who now uses interviews and public appearances as a platform to be direct about what actors, especially black actors, have long faced behind the scenes. Whether discussing a courtroom outcome that took 7 years to resolve or a producer's comment about his skin tone decades earlier, Powell's approach has remained consistent. Tell the story plainly, let the facts speak, and keep working. For an actor whose face has appeared in more films than most audiences could name in one sitting, that steadiness may be the most defining trait of his career. There's also something instructive in the shape of Powell's career for anyone trying to understand how an industry as image-obsessed as Hollywood actually functions behind the scenes. His story does not follow the arc of overnight discovery, followed by a single defining role that sets an actor up for life. Instead, it follows a much more common, much less romanticized path. Years of small parts, a handful of breakthrough moments spread out across different genres, a period of real crisis that could easily have ended things permanently, and then decades more of steady, prolific work that rarely made headlines, but consistently paid the bills and kept his name in circulation. That is the reality for the overwhelming majority of working actors, even successful ones, and Powell's willingness to describe that reality honestly, rather than polishing it into something more triumphant than it was, is part of why his recent interviews have resonated so strongly with younger performers trying to find their own footing in the business. Powell has also used his platform to push back gently against the idea that a single setback, whether a lost role, a damaging headline, or a producer's prejudiced comment, has to define the rest of a career. He points to his own timeline as evidence. A man who did not start earning real money from acting until his 50s, who spent years absorbing rejection rooted in nothing more than the shade of his skin, and who still found himself decades later working steadily in film, television, and voice work, respected by peers and remembered fondly by generations of fans who grew up watching him in very different kinds of roles. That perspective, hard-won and unsentimental, is ultimately what makes his story worth telling in full, court records and all, rather than reduced to a single headline about a lawsuit that a federal judge dismissed years ago.